Welcome to Safeguarding Redefined, a podcast by Cornerstone Safeguarding. We'll be exploring a range of topics from child protection to adult safeguarding and everything in between. Please note some of the topics we'll be discussing may be sensitive in nature and may trigger strong emotions.
Welcome to today's episode where we are starting the first in our series called Voice of the Victim. The topic we will be covering today is on child sexual exploitation, otherwise referred to as CSE. Although in our podcast intro it provides a content warning, I feel it is worth reiterating that we will be covering content that is of a sensitive nature, and we encourage you to seek support if what we talk about today affects you in any way. It's worth noting that our guest and I have already discussed the questions and content for today's episode, and we have agreed on all aspects of what we will be covering. So thank you for joining us today on Safeguarding Redefined and for sharing your experiences with us. Could you provide a brief background of your story?
Can I just say thank you so much for asking me to do this? It's a real privilege and honour. I'm Joel, by the way. I'm quite happy for my name to be mentioned in your brilliant podcast. So I grew up in an era as a gay man in the 1980s where we didn't have kind of many public figures on TV and stuff. And, you know, unlike today where there are a lot of pop stars who are out and very proud of who they are, which is amazing. But growing up in the 80s, there were very few. And so as a gay man, I felt very isolated and very insecure about myself and I was quite timid and shy. And so as a gay man, it wasn't socially accepted at all. Well, just in smaller circles. And I believe a lot of people were quite scared. It was the AIDS epidemic at the time, and there was a lot in the press. And so therefore people were very judgmental, and it was scary times, you know, as a teenager growing up in the 1980s. And I felt kind of isolated by that within itself, let alone kind of other things that I was to kind of go on to experience, but not knowing at the time.
And so with your first experience, because I understand from what we've chatted about before, there have been quite a few experiences.
Yeah.
So would you be able to give us a bit of context, a bit of an understanding of those experiences?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I was really confused. I think is the only word really to describe how I was feeling at the time. I was about 13 years old, and I knew of one gay man who wasn't out, but it was rumoured he was gay, and he was much older than I was. He's about 30 years older than myself, and I reached out to him. I remember scrambling, trying to get his telephone number, and he lived alone, and I telephoned him, and I was very upset. And what I haven't mentioned was actually at the time I grew up in an establishment where I had access to alcohol. It was basically like a pub. And I was drinking quite freely at that stage. And I remember in order just to simply have confidence to make this telephone call, I'd had some vodka. And I phoned this much older man very late at night or in the early hours. And I broke down and I said that I thought I was gay and I wasn't quite sure what to do and who to tell and who to speak to, and the shame that I felt just through being a gay man, and I didn't want to be gay. And he offered to come and collect me because he didn't live too far from where I lived. And so therefore he drove down and picked me up, and we sat in his car in a car park. And I remember him talking to me and me being upset. And then I remember that's when the sexual kind of exploitation started, which I won't really go into detail about, but there was an incident where he took full advantage of me. And in saying that, my body kind of reacted to that. My body found it pleasurable, but obviously many years later, I now know that doesn't make it in any way right. What he did to me as a child, and how he took advantage of me and the consequences of him doing that. And that was one of 3 incidences that happened to me, all under the age of 16, where I was still trying to find out who I was. And the 3 men who I knew, because the other 2 men were out at the time, but it's almost as though, because I was coming to terms with my sexuality and I was talking to them about my sexuality, it gave them full reins just to make advances to me sexually, when I had absolutely no way of, I wouldn't have had the confidence to have said no at the time. They were the adult, but for them to have simply kind of taken advantage of me angers me now. And I've had a lot of counselling and therapy through the abuse. So, yeah, that's kind of my experiences.
I really appreciate you sharing that, and I can, obviously we've spoken before about this as well, and I know how much of an impact that's had on you. So that's taken a lot of confidence for you to be able to share that with not just with me, but with our listeners as well. You mentioned briefly that these people were known to your family. How did people integrate themselves into building trust with your family? Do you feel that that's been a bit of a trigger point for where they felt that they could get away with this?
Yeah, 100%. It's quite fascinating, isn't it? The things you learn. I've obviously expressed an interest in this since I'm as an older man, and I see how people groom and manipulate, and that is exactly what happened to me. I know for sure that 2 of my abusers became very friendly with one of my family members, especially my mother, one of them, who was kind of impressed by this person because of what they did, let's say, within the community. And by him doing that was a way, now looking back, I understand, for him to kind of gain access to me, but not only that, but to build that rapport with me, or to kind of manipulate my family into him then spending more time with me when it came to lifts, to certain events that we were kind of all a part of within the community, and just to, I guess, really to have more easy access to me, to smooth the way, pave the way to easier access.
And was that the same with the other 2 incidents as well? Were they known to the family? Were they known to you personally?
Yeah, all 3 of them were actually known within a local kind of community theatre group. And one of them, I used to bunk off school, pretend I was going to school. Like, literally, this is how young, it's just insane to think of now. I used to go to school, supposedly, in my school uniform, and this guy, he was about 7 or 8 years older than me. So I was, at the time, around 14, 15. I would be going to school, and then I would actually just stop off at his house, and we would spend the day together at his house. He was about 7 years older than me. And yeah, we were caught once by his parent, and it was awful. And I remember looking back, and he shoved me in the loft. He shoved me in the loft in order to to hide me away, knowing full well what he was doing was clearly wrong. And I have such vivid memories of the fear and the terror I kind of felt at the time. It really impacted the fact that what he was doing was wrong, by his reaction to his knowing that his mother was on her way round to to the house, because my mother had actually contacted his mother, thinking, because there was a suspicion that we were close, but my mother seemed to she kind of knew that there was something going on.
So when did you first realise, because you heard to it just a second ago, that you were being sexually exploited? And you also mentioned that earlier that you didn't really understand that context of what that was. And how did it make you feel at the time?
Yeah, certainly the exploitation. I wouldn't have recognised the words then, but I knew that what was happening to me at the time wasn't right, but I wouldn't have necessarily have thought it was a wrong thing to do, because for me the wrong came into the same bracket as perhaps the homophobia. So I felt that it was, I guess the whole wrong aspect was I think was just society telling me that it was wrong to be gay. It was wrong to be a gay man. I didn't see it as being wrong. I saw it as being naughty, as opposed to, but it made me feel very self-conscious at the time of what was kind of happening to me. But the first instance of the abuse by the much older man made me feel incredibly dirty. It made me feel incredibly ashamed. In fact, I have got a memory of the very first instance that it happened, and then going home afterwards. And it was in the early hours of the morning, as I've mentioned earlier, or as I may have said earlier, and scrubbing myself with a nail brush in the bath until I bled, because I just felt incredibly dirty. So when it comes down to the kind of the raw bones of my feelings about how I felt after, especially the first interaction with the older man, I won't give him the dignity of calling him a chap. I felt grossly dirty about myself, mentally, physically, emotionally. It had really severe consequences, which I know affected even that incident. Kind of went on to affect the whole rest of my life in one way or another.
Do you think that the stigma of society, or coming from society, led to you not disclosing what had happened? Did you think that people just wouldn't be interested or help you?
100%. And I believe at the time, again, you could say within schools and stuff, I was experiencing a lot of bullying at school as well. And all that did was it pushed me away to kind of isolate more about myself, to be incredibly secretive. And so there were so many consequences to not being able to just to simply talk about it, to talk about my sexuality. So all I had was this kind of big secret, that therefore this big secret became the secret that I shared with these three men, who then simply just took advantage of that, of me opening up and saying, I was unsure about who I am or what I am at the time, by them not being an adult, a caring adult trying to guide me, but sexually exploiting me.
And you think that they realised that they had that power dynamic? Do you think that you mentioned that they obviously took advantage of it? How long did the abuse continue? Was this straight into the end of your teens? Did they wait until you had got into a romantic relationship until they stopped?
The first initial abuser, the older man, that I remember clearly, there were 3 incidences which I wouldn't have lasted any more than a few months, I believe, until I was strong enough to just not have any. I stopped communication. So that just kind of fizzled out, thankfully. With the guy number 2, I remember that he was it's almost as though, I think at the time, looking back, that he became quite conscious of the fact that what he was doing was wrong. And he was in a long-term relationship. And so therefore he just brought it to an end. And I admit that he broke my heart, we had a specific album that he would play in the car, and he would sing to me this song from this album, and we would listen to this album together and sing together and stuff, and it was like our special song. And so when when it stopped, I mean, it wasn't a relationship, it was very it was all just very sexual, but when it did come to an end, I was hugely devastated. But at the same time, I was a child, and I didn't know how to handle these emotions, so there was so much going on. Me being confused about my sexuality, or not being able to come out, or feeling as though I could come out. On top of that, being confused by the sexual antics that were going on. And also the fact that, I just felt very confused. And I was drinking.
Yeah.
At that age, I had already started to self-medicate in order to, I believe, just to cope, because I wasn't the most confident of young boys, of teenagers. I wasn't a rugged, confident, cocky boy kicking a football around. I was a sensitive, insecure. I mean, outwardly, people may have believed that I was confident, but it was all a facade. It was all just a complete cover-up. I was a huge people pleaser. I didn't know who I was. I was always what I thought you wanted me to be. And so I didn't have the emotional intelligence, therefore, to cope with the situation I was in. And so, therefore, I was medicating with alcohol.
Thank you once again for sharing these very deep and emotional stories. Would you say that second incident of abuse led to the third one? Was this person aware of what was going on in your life?
So that's a very good question. Because let's say let's give them numbers. Okay, for instance, so abuser number 1 was the much older. Abuser number 2 was car song. Abuser number 3 was hide in the loft man, knew of the guy of number 2 who I'd listened to the songs with in the car, and he would joke about it and almost take the mickey of the fact that I had fallen for this man, and use it as a kind of a cruel jibe and tease me with it. And looking back, I think there was an element of control there, and simply manipulating me in order to kind of say that behaving like that, singing songs together in the car, is silly and stupid, whereas look at us in a relationship, we're a bit more serious and we go and do this together as opposed to doing that. So they use that incident as a way as almost weaponry to attack what had gone on previously with this person, to say what we're doing now is much better. But fundamentally, at the end of the day, what was going on between us was that I was a child and he was 7 years older than me. So it was integrally wrong what was going on.
And illegal. And
massively illegal. And also, interestingly, at that time, the age of consent was 21 for a gay man. So, I mean, it wasn't just illegal. I wasn't, 16 as it is today. And I was 14, 15, number 2. I was underage, full stop. Personally, I don't think we have to go, 13, 14, 15. No, it's all, I was massively underage. And also, I just want to say that one of the reasons why this is very helpful for me personally at the moment in my life is that I recently spent some time with one of my nephews, and I was looking at him and thinking just how young he looked for his age, as I did when I was his age, and how innocent, and that innocence is just, it's sad. It saddens me to think that I was that child and that these men took full advantage of me at that age. And I would go as far as to say is that they helped to destroy my life.
I really appreciate you talking to us and being so open as well. And can you describe then, from your last comment, the emotional and psychological toll that this took on you, not only at the time, but also what impact it's had on you in later years?
It stripped away my self-esteem. I was very, very fragile and people-pleasing and not knowing who I was as a person, not having the tools in order to grow as a teenager, because any scaffolding that kind of had been built up from the years prior to the abuse had almost metaphorically been kind of stripped down, pulled down. So I was just incredibly vulnerable. And so my emotional state was just a sense of huge fragility. And psychologically, I felt so isolated and vulnerable.
You mentioned earlier that you struggled with alcohol from a young age. Was that something that featured again in later life?
Yes, it certainly was, because even at that young age, I had started to, now I know, looking back, started to self-medicate.
Yeah.
And the abuse simply impacted how I felt about myself, with the low self-esteem, not knowing who I was as a man, my identity. I was still able to pursue dreams that I had and aspirations in my career. But what had happened was that I had no identity of who I was, my core self, and any strength that I may have had in my teens was stripped away. And so therefore I filled that void with alcohol later in life. And I ended up falling into alcoholism, deeply into alcoholism, in a very grand, messy way. But I'm proud to be over 12 years sober now. So
That's amazing. Well done.
thank you.
And you now support the program?
So after many years of recognizing the fact I had become alcohol dependent, and my career, unfortunately, taking quite a downward spiral, I ended up in rehab, which was approximately just over 13 years ago. Really grateful to have found rehab and not to have found death, which has happened to a lot of my friends over the years. And so I got sober and I started on my journey of sobriety. And once I came out of rehab, I found a 12-step program. I was in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, still am, will be until the day I die. And it's completely changed my life. And what is magical about the 12-step program, or a 12-step program, is the fact through the 12, we go through the process of kind of looking back on our lives, taking a moral inventory, and we learn the tools of how to cope with life and to look back on these things, like my childhood abuse. I've sat down with a sponsor and we've spoken about these things, and we look at our part in it. Not that we always play a part in it, of course, because I was a vulnerable child, but I'm so lucky to have kind of grown through the program, and we kind of make our amends. And there's so much it's life-changing going through a program. Sometimes I wish everyone, on this planet could work a 12-step program, because we just learn to be kind people and to be empathetic people and to understand and to give and to want to help, which is, I've got so much admiration for you and for what you do in helping other people, because there are people like myself who have experienced abuse, but I would often hear people sort of say about mentioning surviving abuse, and that didn't sit particularly well with me. But I've learned that was simply my self-esteem, not allowing myself to call myself a survivor. Or perhaps actually it's just been a shift from going from victimhood to being the survivor, which is something I'm truly grateful for, because I don't think if I would have been able to have survived, or if I didn't label myself as a survivor, I wouldn't be sat here today talking to you, which is a real privilege and a pleasure. So thank you for asking me.
No, I'm so glad that you could come in and share your story. And that leads me on to my last question, which is, what message do you have for other survivors of abuse?
Oh, I think it's integral that we talk to each other in some way or another. So communication, nobody should be carrying around secrets of what happened to them as a child that they had no control over, especially when there are people out there who manipulate, who groom, and therefore we need to talk about these things together as a collective in order to protect the young people of today.
One of the things that we like to, or message that we like to get across through our podcast, is that safeguarding is everyone's responsibility. And your story today has highlighted that when you were experiencing your abuse, there was no one around you that you could really turn to. And this is what safeguarding is all about. It's making sure that anyone, it doesn't just have to be young people, that a safeguarding lead is so vitally important, because they are that person who is there. They are the people who are building the safeguarding culture, because it's everyone's responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
They are there to make sure that we interrupt harm. We make sure that there isn't access, that people aren't able to get away and have this power imbalance that they so need in order to commit such horrendous offences as what you've experienced today.
And if I could, Chris, very quickly, if you don't mind me interrupting you, it's fundamental that today, in this day and age, going back to what I was talking about originally, when it's much more open and easier to live life as a gay man, the same thing should be when we are communicating abuse with children and looking after children, safeguarding them. I had one teacher at school, I remember her name, I won't say her name, and I remember one day she was so kind to me because she knew I was being bullied at school, which was all part of safeguarding for me and the abuse I was experiencing. And I was so close to telling her what was happening to me, because she was saying to me, why are you not coming to school? Why are you not coming? And that is one of my biggest regrets in life. So because how things could have been, my trajectory could have been so different if perhaps I just opened my mouth up to that one person. And so we need people keeping their ears open. We need people keeping their eyes open, looking after younger, vulnerable people so that they can thrive at life and not be traumatized and for allowing any kind of abuse to make them fragile, as has been for me. But I don't want my story to be a tale of, oh, woe is me. I as I said, I am a survivor. I think I may be at a different place in my life if necessarily the safeguarding aspect have played a larger role in my life through a teacher, through a parent, through a professional like yourself. Things could have been so much more different. It's absolutely integral that people are looked after.
That's a really powerful statement, and I don't think I could have said anything better than that. So I really appreciate actually you saying that, because that does highlight just how important safeguarding is for everyone. Well, thank you so much for answering these incredibly difficult questions today. I know threw a few curveballs in there for you, but I just really enjoyed listening to your story. And if any of our listeners have experienced anything raised in today's episode, please do reach out to a trusted person for support. Should you require any information on support organisations or charities, please just let us know, and we're more than happy to signpost you. Thank you so much, Joel, for your time today. We really appreciate you speaking on this harrowing topic, and for your openness and honesty on the impact and effects it's had on you, and all the experiences that you've had.
My absolute pleasure. It's been a joy. Thank you.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, please do share it with your colleagues and your friends. Leave us a review. Let us know your thoughts on any of our social media pages. And also don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss another episode of Safeguarding Redefined.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Safeguarding Redefined. Remember, every voice matters. If you have a story to share or a question to ask, please let us know. To stay updated on the latest episodes and safeguarding news, be sure to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on LinkedIn or check out cornerstonesafeguarding.co.uk.